everybody, Christina Previtt here. I'm one of the faculty for the Modern Management of the Older Adult course. I am here today to talk about the Reader's Digest rebuttal. So a little bit of background information. The readersdigest.com posted 14 exercises you shouldn't be doing after the age of 50. And a lot of them were actually not evidence-based recommendations and created a lot of fear around exercise and movement, and not something that we necessarily jive with, being evidence-based clinicians and physical therapists who work with older adults. And so we just couldn't let that slide. And so Dustin, my faculty mate, partner in crime, did an amazing rebuttal. We got over 90,000 views. We had a huge response to the point where Sharon, I'm going to butcher her last name, Firereason, the author of the original article, reached out to us and said, we heard you. Let's do a follow-up article where we're looking at the myths around fitness after 50. And the article got published last night. Dustin and I both contributed to it. So did Dr. Sully. He's an emergency room physician who works with Starting Strength and owns a gym called Grace Steel. And they had a couple of other contributing authors who I hadn't heard of before. But I wanted to go over some of the myths because I thought these were amazing, because what we want to do with our courses as clinicians working with older adults is to empower people to move. I always say we don't have a problem in Canada about people being too active and hurting themselves, particularly after the age of 50. We have the opposite problem where people aren't active enough and we're trying to encourage physical activity. So if these types of articles come up that are creating fear around movement, then we're kind of doing a disservice. We're doing the opposite of what we want to be doing, which is encouraging people to move more. Of course, we're going to try and do it in a safe way, considering people's injury history and medical history. But some of these general blanket fitness articles can actually do a lot of harm, because if I had a client who read this article, took it as doctrine, and then came to see me, I might be fighting preconceptions around what is safe and what isn't safe. And I wouldn't even know that I was fighting some of these barriers. Okay, so let's go through some of the myths. I have the articles pulled up. Numero uno is I haven't exercised my whole life. It's too late to start. And I love that this was number one, because we often have a lot of people that, had a really active job and they were active and moved in their life, but they had never been in a structured exercise program. And so when they come to see me in a clinic and I'm getting them into an exercise program, then they think that it's too late because they've never done this before. And that's just not true. We know that there's a study in 1990 for wheelchair-bound older adults who had frailty, who were all in their 90s and were in a resistance training program, and they had an increase of 150% of the cross-sectional area of their quad, which means that we can always get stronger, especially if we've gone through a period of deconditioning. So I love that that's how it started, because the biggest thing is that means we can encourage exercise, and that's the important part. Okay, so myth number two, I shouldn't run anymore. I like this one as well, because I often get the idea that running causes arthritis. And what the current literature says is that recreational running doesn't actually cause arthritis. General population, we see about a 10 to 11% prevalence of knee osteoarthritis in our older adult populations. In recreational runners, the percentage is actually between 3 and 5%. That being said, competitive and elite runners, it's 13.5%. So that may be indicative that people who are in high-level sport, who are pushing the boundaries, pushing the endurance, they may have a higher prevalence of arthritis. There may be a little bit of, the reason why that may be a little convoluted is that the highest risk factor for the development of knee arthritis is previous injury. And when you're competing at a high level, the idea of never being injured is just, it's just never going to happen. You're going to have an injury if you're working at a high level. You're pushing your body to its extreme limits. And so there might be a little bit of a confounding factor there. So I love that it says you shouldn't run anymore. If you love to run and your joints are feeling good, there's no pain, then you should keep doing it. Yeah, so many people who run well into their older age and continue to see benefits without issues. We're seeing people who are competing marathons in the 60, 70, 80, 90 age groups. These are actually the age groups that are continuing to break records on a pretty consistent basis, because we're seeing more and more people running into older age, which I think is fantastic. And it teaches us a lot as well about, what are some of the declines we see in our cardiovascular system as a result of age, because these people are still training and we are going to see some decline in function. But how much of it is related to deconditioning? Because that also tends to happen as we get older. We don't move around as much. And if we're not moving around as much, then we're going to see a decline because of lack of movement. Okay, myth number 3 is probably a slightly more controversial one. Walking is enough. And the idea around this is that oftentimes when I'm working with my older clients, they tell me that their mode of exercise is walking. And that's fantastic if we are challenging the pace at which we walk. But oftentimes that is not what happens. If we're going for a leisurely stroll, we're never starting to fail the talk test where we have to stop every couple of words to take a breath, because we're working at a certain level of exertion that it's creating that cardiovascular demand. And so the idea behind this myth is that if you're walking at a leisurely pace, that you're doing enough progressive overload on your heart system to see a change. And we need to make sure that when we are exercising, that it's intentionally difficult so that we are forcing our body to change. And so the quote here is, while there is research connecting some walking to basic heart health, walking alone does not stress your heart enough to create true cardiovascular improvement. And so there's a lot of benefits for especially walking outside, the idea of being in nature and corresponding with your environment, and the social aspects of going for a walk with family members. But the idea with any sort of exercise program is that it needs to be challenging. And so oftentimes walking is just not as challenging as we need it to be for us to see the change. Okay, so the next myth is lifting weights is bad for my joints. I obviously contributed to this one. I'm a little bit biased. That's the area of my PhD. And I love it because the first line is you don't need to stick to 2-pound weights just because you're in your 50s, 60s, or even 70s. And so I have a couple of my clients who are in their 70s who are still deadlifting in the hundreds of pounds. The USAPL, the United States Powerlifting Federation, just had their national championship. And there was an 81-year-old who deadlifted 279 pounds off the floor on the platform. And that is super crazy and really exciting to see that he's able to maintain that level of strength into his 9th decade. And so these paradigms are starting to be challenged. And for us as clinicians, we recognize that especially as we get older, the importance of strength training, I would say, goes up. For our women after 50 who are going through menopause, that change in estrogen profile makes strength training so important for maintaining the integrity of our bone mineral density, as well as allowing our bodies to be strong to complete ADLs and IADLs. And therefore, we need to be advocates, not creating fear. And obviously, when we're working with our clients, we're going to be starting them where they're at. And if they're starting on a 2-pound dumbbell, that's fine. But recognizing that it's okay to progress past that. And so when some of my older clients ask me, what weight should I get for at home? I say 5, 10, 15 pounds at least, because your body's going to be strong. You're going to be able to do that. And I can grab a 2-pound soup can to start you with, and then you'll have the weights available when those 2 pounds get really easy. Okay, next myth, you can't fix poor balance. And as PTs, we know that that's not true, that we can improve balance. But that's often, we think that once we're at this risk of falls or once our balance is bad, we can't do anything about it. We just can't challenge our balance anymore, and we have to be very careful. And then we start to be very scared of movement, and we can get into that negative spiral. But balance is just like any other system, right? It's about motor control and neural efficiency. And so balance is another system that we need to challenge. Just like anything else, we need to force a system to change by creating a stress, that general adaptations, we need to have that stress for those adaptations to happen. And so just like our heart and our heart health and our bones and our muscle health, our balance is another thing that we can challenge in order to see improvements. The ACSM guidelines on balance actually are kind of vague in respect that they don't advocate for pure balance training unless there's a risk factor for falls or you're a previous faller. And the reason for that is because if we can see strengths or improvements in cardiovascular and resistance training and there is no impairment in balance, then we probably don't need to prioritize that system. But that being said, if there is an impairment, then it's something that we can incorporate into our training, often in a warm-up or cool-down type of scenario, in order to see those improvements in that system. So I love that because oftentimes fear is one of the biggest things that prevents people from moving. And this is challenging the fact that having poor balance is kind of a life sentence. You're always going to have poor balance. Okay, myth, I'm inflexible and I have to accept that. So often as we get older, we tend to have a tightening of the joints. We have decreased joint space, which can restrict our joint range of motion. So some of that is a physiological effect, but that doesn't mean that our body is incapable of changing muscular length. Genetics does play a role, but they said you can improve what you've inherited by adding regular stretching or yoga into your routine. And if you've talked to a yogi who talks about how they were doing downward dog, when they started and versus now, they're obviously going to have improvements in strength improvements in flexibility because it's something that you're practicing. The one thing that I would say around this is that the evidence for changes in tensile strength in the muscle advocate for a longer hold as we get older. So after we're age of 50, 60, they advocate for holding all of our stretches over a minute. And oftentimes that's one of the barriers is that I always get my clients to actually put a timer on because a minute seems like it goes like this in day to day. But when you're holding a stretch that you find mildly to moderately uncomfortable, a minute seems like a long time. So something to keep in mind. So all the PTs are probably going to love this one. The next one, I'm injured. I should wait to start working out. I always talk to any of the clients that come in to stave off. And I said that I'd be hard pressed to find a condition or injury that I'm not able to work around to make sure that you are still able to be active. Even after I like this because it says doctors encourage people with knee or hip replacements to start moving as soon as possible. And the reason is that it promotes healing. Movement improves healing. And so that's why exercise is medicine and movement is medicine, motion is lotion are all of these common phrases that we use in PT practice to help us try and convince our clients to move around a little bit more. Also, that being said, there's been research in rheumatoid arthritis for people who are at the same level of pain, but are different in terms of their level of physical activity. And people who are more active are better able to handle their pain level with showing an improvement in quality of life compared to people with the exact same pain level who are inactive. So there's actually an analgesic effect to movement. And if you see the right healthcare provider, they can help you navigate that process. Not to mention that not moving at all plus being injured is something that is going to affect our mental health. And we want to make sure that people are staying in good spirits while they're trying to deal with an injury. Okay, we have a couple more. So the next one is always see a doctor before you start an exercise program. And that kind of came out of an old ACSM guideline that advocated for anybody with cardiovascular risk factors should go see a doctor and potentially perform an exercise stress test before starting a exercise program. That recommendation was actually rescinded, I think it was 2015 or 2016, where they published a new guideline that said that the positives or the benefits of exercising irrespective of cardiovascular risk outside of anyone who has direct contraindications to exercise far, far, far outweigh the benefits or the potential harms, not to mention the barrier that it creates to starting exercise. If you're saying, okay, I want to start exercising, now I need to go see my doctor, it's going to take a couple days, then I need a referral to a cardiologist or to a diagnostic imaging, and then I need this, and this, and then maybe in 3 months, once I've gone through all those tests and everything's okay, then I can start exercising. And so what the ACSM kind of concluded was that those considerations and that pathway that you would have to take, even if you had cardiovascular risk factors, was enough to prevent people from exercising. And so they actually took back that guideline and said, and this was, they quoted Dustin, where they said the American College of Sports Medicine has loosened its recommendation in order to get people moving. And that's exactly what they mean. So you should see a doctor before you start a program if you have current symptoms or a history of cardiovascular, metabolic, or renal disease. Otherwise, consider your current activity levels and gradually progress from there. And so absolutely right. We're not going to bring a person who was previously inactive and put them right up to the 150 minutes that is currently recommended for community dwelling older adults, but we can get you started in terms of working with increasing your levels of activity. Again, following with a PT, especially someone in cardiac rehabilitation, is a great place to start with this. Okay. So next one, I actually took a video of some of my master's group today because the next myth is high intensity interval training is dangerous. And so I had 14 of my clients in class this morning right before this, and I took a big scanning screenshot of them doing all of those exercises that before in the article they said were bad, and I thought I was going to post it later on, just saying, we're doing all of these things that now we're saying are definitely myths. Because some of my clients read that old Reader's Digest article and they said, Christina, we do all of these things. I don't understand. And I said, I know, don't worry, the rebuttal is coming. And so high intensity interval training is bad. It's actually been demonstrated to be one of the most effective ways to get in shape. And so there's actually a lot of research on high intensity resistance training, not only in older adults, where again, the interval part is key, right? So for some of my clients in their 70s and 80s, their work to rest ratios are going to be very different than my 15-year-old that I'm trying to kick his butt to get into shape for his sports season. And so it's going to be very different, and we're obviously going to change the parameters. But there's evidence for its use in cardiac rehab, as well as post-stroke. And so we're starting to use these modalities a lot more in clinical practice. Mitch Babcock talked about the REMOM, same thing. It's interval training, where we're able to increase the amount of efficiency we have in our treatment programs because we're getting a lot of work done in a short amount of time because we've boosted the intensity. So this one is another one of mine and Dustin's. Myth is that squats will wreck your knees. And so there's a reason why squats are one of the fundamental movements. It's how we get up out of a toilet, out of a chair, out of bed, all of those things. And so they quoted me, properly performed squats will not result in knee pain or injury. They're one of the staples of a well-rounded exercise program that can help you get a stronger lower body. And so this was a really old myth around it causing arthritis and patellofemoral pain, but this is beating a dead horse that squats are going to be bad for your knees. We just know that that's not true, and that we may have to modify the way we perform a squat. For example, if I have somebody with an active meniscus tear, I'm not getting them to go all the way down. I'm watching to make sure that there's no valgus movement through their knee, but in the end, not bad for the knees, not going to cause knee pain. Okay. This one's probably something that you guys hear in your clinical practice all the time. I can't exercise. I have bone-on-bone arthritis. Sorry, you're hearing our dogs in the background. The way that we kind of think about arthritis is that everybody's going to have some type of arthritis. I say you need to think of arthritis like gray hair. So it's part of the aging process. Looking at people with no pain in their knees, we've seen that some people have bone-on-bone arthritis with no pain. And so even though you have some signs of arthritis on x-ray, we know in the knees, in the back, in the hips that it doesn't necessarily correspond to pain well. For some people it does, and then we may need to investigate other options or go down that pathway for joint replacement. but it shouldn't be a barrier for you being able to exercise. I see a lot of clients with bone-on-bone arthritis in my clinic who are looking for a strengthening program to avoid going through joint replacement. And so I always say, get the guidance of a well-trained healthcare provider who knows kind of how to help with these type of programs. And they said too, it's also worth mentioning to manage your weight, which again, we know is true with arthritis. All right, we are almost there. A couple more to go. So the next one is strength training will make me bulky and immobile. This was John Sullivan's contribution. He was talking about, I still get some of my women in their 50s and 60s who say that they don't want to strength train because they're afraid of getting bulky muscles. And this is just trying to put that to rest and say, that's not going to happen. I've been strength training for 10 years and I am by no means bulky. And so I kind of use myself as an example, but especially as we get older, the hormonal drive for hypertrophic changes in the muscle is less and less. And a lot of the strength improvements that we see in our older clients are less about muscular hypertrophy and more about neural adaptations and efficiency. So even less as we get older are we going to have those big bulky muscles. And women, they say they desperately need to lift. Women lose muscle, bone, and strength faster than men, making weight training a critical part of any woman's fitness program, which is great. Okay, this one's one of my favorites. Myth, I can't get stronger. I'm X years old, I can't get stronger. That's not true, especially if some of the loss of strength is related to deconditioning, which can happen a lot in our 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond. And so, you can get stronger. And so what we're seeing with some of the masters athlete population is that they're often at the same level as a non-trained younger person. So elite level masters athlete and elite level younger athlete, the younger athlete is going to show it more improvements in strength, VO2 max, et cetera, et cetera. But a trained masters athlete is going to do just as well in terms of physical performance and cardio and physiological factors as a non-trained younger person, which is a really cool thing to think about because it's just showing how much we can maintain as we get older. And this was an age group that the average age was 70. So we're not talking about a 50-year-old athlete. We're talking about people who are continuing to train and be active in their 8th, 9th decade of life, which is really cool. So yes, strength can improve. I mentioned that Italian study that was done in 1990, perfect example of being able to see improvements at any age. So as I get older, I should avoid pain when exercising. This one was a controversial one. It wasn't one that Dustin and I flagged. It was Paul Gardner, he's the administration of community rehab at Hillcrest. That it may be true that there are certain types of pain you should avoid with exercise. However, to achieve gains in strength and endurance, your muscles must be overloaded. And a byproduct of overloading muscles at any age is muscle soreness and sometimes mild joint aches and discomfort. And so I think there's two parts to this. One is that sometimes my clients don't know what DOMS is, delayed onset muscle soreness. And so it's something that we need to explain, that you may have this diffuse widespread pain across the muscle groups that we used, and that it's very normal. It may peak between 24 and 48 hours, but it tends to go away after a couple of days, and it forces your muscles to adapt. I also talk about some mild discomfort after, especially if we're training the muscles that cross the joint that is in pain. And so I think, we need to figure out what level is acceptable in terms of having pain with training. And I guess as we get older, the odds that nothing is going to be cranky is a little bit less realistic, but we're obviously not trying to cause acute pain, but we're trying to make sure that, people are still staying active and not avoiding every activity because of pain and discomfort. This one was another one that wasn't Dustin and I, and I've never heard this myth before. I'm skipping exercise because I want to keep my mind fit. But as we know, physical activity actually helps keep mental acuity with age. We are still trying to figure out which modalities, because there's been some studies that say that there could be different effects based on the type of exercise you're doing. but working out has significant positive effects on the brain too. Growing evidence that being physically active benefits brain health and can slow the decline in brain function, especially as we see more and more of the dementias be vascular in nature, just like the effects of aerobic training on the heart, lungs, and just the blood circulatory system. The same is true if there's a vascular component to dementia. Okay, we got two more. Exercise is too risky, I might fall. This kind of goes along with some of the balance. And so we're trying to avoid that fear where we can always tailor an exercise program based on a person's balance capabilities and strength capabilities. So I think that was a great one. So we can always gradually build confidence with improvements in balance, strength, and endurance so that we can be less fearful of falling. And myth, because of my chronic health problems, I should skip exercise. And I would say that there are very few conditions where we want to avoid exercise entirely. We may need to obviously moderate the amount of intensity that we're using with these different conditions. Again, get into the rehab space, right? That's where we know this is our wheelhouse. Like this is where we're movement specialists, and we can help with consideration of some of the stuff that's going on and the symptoms and pathology that's happening with some of these chronic conditions. So that is the 17 myths. Dustin told me this morning too that it was picked up on NBC News. See, I'm Canadian. It's so funny. I don't really know what the titles are. But I hope you guys enjoy the article. I would love it if you guys could share this article as well, just because we don't want the 14 fears to be the prevailing theme across the internet. We want the myths and things that you can you're definitely capable of doing, and try to empower our older clients. So thank you guys for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed the article. We may have one more coming up where we have a couple examples of people who started exercising over the age of 50 and now are in the best shape of their lives. One of my old clients may be in this article, so I'm hoping that comes to happen, comes to fruition. And so thank you for kind of all your attention, all your shares and views of these, because it has really created positive change and shows the power of social media to kind of drive change, which is really, really cool. If you guys are looking to jump in on some of the modern management courses, we have some live courses coming up in December and early 2019. You should check it out on the website. And our next online option for the modern management of the older adult course starts in January. So it should be a New Year's resolution. Join the older adult course. All right, guys, have a wonderful Wednesday, and I will talk to you all soon.